So I've never played a Shantae game before. This is my first entry into the series, and I'm going to just, well, okay. First of all, this video is probably going to be kind of short, and it's probably going to be me mostly talking about gameplay rather than story because, well, of the same reason that it would be if I was talking about like a Mega Man game or something. I mean, there's some story here, but primarily a focus on the gameplay concepts. But the reason this is my first Shantae game is because of the sexy. I don't know how else to put that. I had seen the artwork previously in style, and I was like, well, I don't want to have anything to do with that, because I am a prude, as we've discussed before. So that's just not my thing. I mean, if you want to, go for it, but yeah, I'll be over here. Now, I find that amusing in hindsight for two reasons. First of all, because I loved this game, Half Genie Hero specifically, and really enjoyed playing it, and I will be praising the hell out of it throughout this rumination. But second, because it took very little time for me to not find it sexy at all, but instead something else. Cute! This game is so cute! I mean, when you turn into a little monkey and she's doing this little dance, like, in time to the music in some cases, or when she turns into the mermaid and she's walking on land and she's just got this happy face on. Just, It was so adorable. I found myself going, aww, at virtually every turn throughout this game, and there's actually quite a few instances of that. And so, and as anybody who was watching me live can attest to, I just kept being like overwhelmed by the cute factor. It was awesome. But anyways, so this is actually a recent game. This just came out last September. Obviously, if you're watching this in the future, that means 2016 is when this game came out, September 2016. And it was a Kickstarter game. Apparently made its goals, not all of its stretch goals, but nevertheless made plenty of money in order to actually be able to make, which is awesome. There is apparently a Risky Boots DLC, which will be coming out at some point. As I say this, historically speaking, they have already released some gameplay footage and some teasers of that, so it's entirely possible, based on how far in advance I do these things, that that may actually be out by the time this video goes live. And I would love to play that. I actually would. I'm invested now at this point. I really enjoyed playing this game. Which brings me to my next point. As I was playing through it, obviously I made the comparison to Mega Man earlier. And I want to explain that really briefly. Like I said, gameplay discussion here. I always associate Mega Man with a term I refer to as precision platforming. Now, the way I define precision platforming is there's a lot of the stage design has to do with you having to very carefully navigate your way through the stages. But, this is the important part, you have almost total control of your character. There's no squiggity, like in a Mario Brothers game. There's no, I'm trying to think how to put this. It's hard to describe. I bet most people who've played Mega Man games know what I'm talking about. Because Mega Man games are very, very controllable, very, very predictable, and very precise. The controls are extremely precise and extremely fast. You want to jump, turn around, jump, turn around, jump, turn around within the space of a few frames. You can do that. It allows for that kind of a thing. There's no input delay. There's no physics pushing against you, all that kind of stuff. So that's what I refer to as a precision platformer. By some extent, like, say, Super Metroid would also qualify, even though Super Metroid is a different genre. But you get the idea of the controls. That's the important part. I'm also kind of good at precision platformers. I mean, I am terrible at video games, as anybody who watches my streams can attest to, but one of the very, very few types of games that I actually feel I am still good at, even to this day, is the Mega Man-style game. And this game just slotted right in there into my Mega Man mentality, right alongside Shovel Knight, actually. And I loved that. I love the sheer precision of the controls. For example, one of the things they could have done very, very wrong is the transformations. It would have been really easy to have like a drop-down menu, and then switch to monkey form, and then jump around and be awesome. By the way, monkey form was probably my favorite for pure utility. In addition to the obvious wall jumping thing, the arcs of the jumps were fantastic. So it was just... Anybody who's watching the stream, again, can attest that I used monkey form for a lot of the platforming in this game. Anyways. But, so, what they did instead was made it so that you can hit the button, and of course if you have the upgrade it goes very, very quickly. So it's hit the button, switch, jump, jump, hit the button, switch, jump, jump. it's hard to explain, of course, without actually showcasing it. And of course, I don't do gameplay footage because I don't have an editing team. It's just me, and I only have so many hours in the day. I'm already working 12 hours a day, so I don't really have time to add gameplay footage to the back of my video. That's why we have this lovely vista instead. But just trust me when I say that within the space of about a second and a half, you can switch to monkey form, jump up onto a platform, change back to regular Shantae before you land, switch to elephant, and then smash into a block. That's an exact example that I'm thinking of right there. And it's just, boom, just very smooth. And that is awesome. Because, again, it would have been so easy to screw that up and make that a hassle, but instead it adds to the flow of the game, because the game has wonderful flow. It is very smooth in the way the stages go, in the way that the progression through the quests go, in the way that the combat and the bosses go. Everything is just whoosh, and it has this magnificent pace to it. I love it. Which brings me to my next point. I know this feels like we're bouncing around a bit, but speaking of flow and smoothness, the art style and animation are actually kind of amazing. Now, if you don't like the aesthetic of the art style, that's totally up to you. But the quality of the art style, there's not really any artifacts. I was playing the PC version, by the way, for reference. There's no really artifacts. There's no real... Like some of the flaws that you can see in this kind of cel-shaded game, or in a 2D game, or in a game that has, art in general as its presentation, there's no amateur stuff here. It is all extremely well drawn and extremely well animated. I cannot overemphasize how much the animations of this game blew me away. Over and over and over. I think I mentioned it like 5 times while I was streaming it, just because it just kept being awesome. Every single action has like 20 frames of animation, which may not sound like a lot, but keep in mind the average for this kind of a game is usually 3 to 6, just to give you a little bit of perspective on that. I loved it, and it adds to that whole smooth presentation thing, because smooth animations means while you're moving around, you can see exactly what you're doing, and that, as weird as this may sound, the smooth animations combined with the smooth transformations, combined with the precise controls, all adds to that overall feeling of pace. It feels like the tempo of which you're going through this game is solely determined by you. You could probably go through this game fairly slowly. I did not. I blazed through this game. But I don't mean that as a bad thing. I love that the game let me do that. I love that the game was designed to allow me to do that. Again, like a Mega Man game. I keep referencing Mega Man, though, and Shovel Knight, but there's actually another game that just kept coming up when I was playing through this game. DuckTales Remastered, which came out last year or the year before, I actually forget which. It's fairly recent. And as I was going through this game, I'm like, oh my god, this just really, really reminds me of that. I would also consider DuckTales Remastered to be a precision platformer, for reference, especially with the Pogo Stick edition. And so, God, this is reminding of it. After I beat the game, sat down and looked up a couple things, I was like, oh, it's the same team. They actually made DuckTales Remastered. So I guess that makes a little bit of sense. Go figure. So let's talk about a couple other aspects of the gameplay. First of all, there's no lives in this game. Under most circumstances, if you die, you either just die, and, like if you hit spikes or whatever, you go back to the last screen scroll point. What I mean by that is the levels are chunked up into usually 3 completely separate sections, which you can warp through later when you get the ability to do that. And then it's like one, unending screen scroll until you get to like a door, and then the screen kind of goes like you would in an old NES game or a SNES game, and then you're in the new transition area. That basically becomes your continue point. So there are continue points throughout it, and if you die, you go back to that. Under other circumstances, if you fall into a pit or whatnot, you just lose some health and go back to the continue point. And so it's interesting because there's no lives, but if you do die, you just hit continue and you go back to the continue point. Now that may seem a little bit too easy, too little of a death penalty. I don't think it is. I think this game actually hits a very nice sweet spot when it comes to death penalty. I could actually talk a lot about just the concept of penalty of failure is actually what I call that, especially when it comes to side-scrolling platformers, because I happen to know these type of games pretty well. But you always have to decide as a designer what level of penalty for failure that you want to do. And there's lots of different ways you can do this. Mario Brothers, for example, usually has a two-layer penalty of failure. There's lose some health, which will make you lose your power-up or whatever, and then there's lose your life, which means you go back to the continue point or back to the beginning of the level. Just to use a very basic example of penalty of failure. I've already told you the penalty of failure in this game. What I find interesting, though, is the reason I say it's not too little is because you still have to go back to that continue point. And some of these, actual contiguous sections can be pretty long. So you have to complete this entire jumping puzzle over an empty pit, and if you fall into a pit halfway through, you lose all that progress. So there is still a penalty, but it's not too severe. You don't have to go back to the beginning of the level. You don't have a finite number of lives, and, well, to be 100% blunt, I have said for years at this point that the live system is an outdated concept that really doesn't need to be used anymore. So I'm with it. I like the way they do this. I did get frustrated, I think, twice in this game with regards to penalty of failure. Once had to do with those little ring things you have to grab, and the other time had to do with the first boss, the mermaid boss, because I was having a hell of a time with her. That was on me, though. Speaking, retroactively looking back at it and being like, aha, having played through the whole game, I just hadn't gotten used to the game well enough yet for the first mermaid boss. So that's on me, not on the game. The rings thing is on the game, though. I've been doing nothing but praising the gameplay design so far. One thing I do have to point out, the rings are not well designed. Now, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, there's these little rings, and they're usually on some kind of track, like in the factory level, or going down a conveyor belt for the ending, or something like that. And you can grab onto them. Thing is, the way it's designed, this is admittedly speculation, but based on having just played the game, it feels like, so if here's the ring, you have to hit the lower hitbox of the ring, not just the ring in general, and you have to hit it with a specific part of your hurtbox, excuse me. I guess that would be hitbox, but whatever. So, like, you have to get this part of your sprite onto this part of their sprite in order to catch it, and they're usually moving, too. That may not sound like a big deal, but that got extremely frustrating, especially since it's easier than you'd think, especially when you're in a hurry or when you're just, oh god, I gotta jump, to jump for the ring and not the specific part of the ring. Because you basically have to jump as if you're trying to dodge the ring. And that got a little bit irritating. Early on, it wasn't a big deal because if you fell off the ring or missed the jump, you'd just fall down a few levels and go back up. During what is effectively the last part of gameplay, when you're escaping from the volcano as it's exploding, spoiler alert, there's a volcano that explodes in this game, I died a lot to that because there's a sequence where you have to jump onto a ring, which is hard in its own right, as you're plummeting away from this firewall, and then you had to jump down to a second layer of rings. And that was just, oh my god, it was driving me crazy. Turns out the solution was to not jump at all. The rings were lined up in a way where you just fall from one ring to the other. Didn't look like that to me. The only reason I stumbled upon that was because I mistimed the jump. And I was like, oh, and there's just that moment where you just let the controller go because you think you're about to die, and so you're getting ready for the next time. And I just fell into the second ring, and I was just like, what? It's a small complaint, but it did irritate me a couple of times. Speaking of complaints, though, well, while we're talking about these, let's go ahead and discuss another complaint I have, and that is the last boss. Right before that. Now, this is weird, because the first time you fight the Dynamo Machine, the Dynamo Brain, or Tinker Brain, that's what it's called. First time you fight Tinker Brain, it's an awesome fight. And let me go ahead and say that almost every fight in this game, every boss fight, is actually really cool, to some extent or another. Some of them are kind of basic, but are still fun, still interesting. They're still cool mechanics. And the Tinker Brain fight might actually be my favorite boss in this game. Moving left or right drains its power that enables you to try and attack certain parts of it. But if you stop moving left or right, its power starts to regenerate, and you have to hit certain parts of it. So you want to line up where you're going to be on the circle as you're going left and right in order to drain it. And it gains new attacks and new varieties to those attacks as the fight goes on, as a proper boss should. It was awesome. Then we get to the final fight, which is technically against, like, the dark Tinker Brain or whatever, and that was boring. No variety at all. The fight was wait for the shield to be open facing you, attack the dark genies, and knock them into it. That's it. The dark genies attack you with little black stuff on the ground, you jump over, and little shots which you dodge, and that's it. It was weird, since every other fight in this entire game was at least interesting or fun, and it just got really, really boring because there was no variety, no escalation, no unique mechanics, and on top of all of that, it took too long. The boss had way too much health, and so I've just found myself getting frustrated as I'm going through this, like, oh, come on. And it's weird. I mean, even the first boss, when you're fighting against the giant, I'm not going to say the acronym, the snail thing, the snail ship, that was at least fun and cool. I don't know. I do have one other complaint. This is probably the biggest actual complaint I have about this game, because it actually legitimately gave me a headache. I'm not kidding. The hub town, and I'm going to try to describe this. I'm on a swivel chair here, so I can kind of describe this. Pretend I'm the camera, and I'm following Shantae as she goes throughout town. It works like this. So the town is basically a circle, and the camera stays in the middle of the circle and watches Shantae as she goes around. And the first time I did that, that just started making me dizzy and nauseous. And like I said, it actually gave me a headache. I had to start doing this, where I would look over my glasses so I couldn't quite see what I was doing, and just memorize that it's the sky place, and then the bathhouse, and then the item house, in order to figure out which one was which, because I couldn't see anything, really, which was the point. That's probably the only truly major complaint I have about this game. It actually gave me a headache to play it. Weird design choice. I was actually really scared right at the beginning, because I was like, oh god, if every level is like this, I can't play this game. I'm going to have to cancel this Rumination because I can't physically play this game. Thankfully, it was just the hub world. Thank God. Anyways, another thing they do right. So, the level design, I already kind of praised the level design. One of the things they do really well with the level design is, after you go through a level the first time, and that's, think of it as like the story mode when you go through the level the first time and you beat the boss and you change things. When you go through the level the second time, and every subsequent time, the level has a second state in which everything is different now. Now, the little details will change from then on, like some NPCs will be added in, or some items will be added in, or whatever, but after the first time, the level has several things about it that are changed from that point onward. It's not quite Metroidvania, but it is at least leaning in that direction, because the game encourages you, and in fact requires you in a couple of cases, to go back through the levels these second times through and get additional items or additional power-ups or a quest thing or whatever. And of course you can go back and get gems if you want to in order to level up your abilities, all that fun stuff. And I like that level design mentality. I kind of wish a Mega Man game would do something like that, where it's like you beat Shadow Man. I'm just going to default to Mega Man 3 for some reason. And then you go back, when you go back through the level, like the blackout section isn't there, or maybe the power's out on this other thing, and then these guys don't attack, but now there's this new enemy who's over here, and there's this new item that wasn't there before. You know, I think that's a cool concept, and I love that. I don't know if previous Shantae games did that, but it was really well used here, because there's only like 6, I guess, stages in this game. But this replayability added a lot, or not replay, the changing stage thing added a lot of replayability to the game, and made, I mean, it took me a whole day to get through this game, pretty much starting in the morning and ending in the evening. So, oh, by the way, speaking of which, this game has a lot of replay value in general. I actually do want to play this game again. Probably do a 100% playthrough. I actually got 82% collection rating this playthrough, and that was just playing through it for the Rumination. Admittedly, part of that was because I was warned that I should go ahead and make sure to get the good ending, which requires you to do a few other collection quests that I otherwise probably wouldn't have done for Rumination. And there's, by the way, there's a good ending and a bad ending while we're on the subject. And there's also a New Game Plus, which is always a plus to a game. In this case, the New Game Plus doesn't carry forward everything, but it does carry forward your basic form. So you could start the game with monkey... It's monkey, elephant, mermaid, crab, I think, is what you start with. I don't think you get harpy. Oh, no, maybe you do get harpy to start with. I don't remember the exact ones. It's not every form, but it is most of the major, the required forms. I know it doesn't include spider, and I think it doesn't include bat. I'm not actually sure. Either way, awesome stuff there. There was one other thing I wanted to talk about. Oh, yeah, the upgrade system. So you get gems to buy upgrades. More than anything, this reminded me of Zelda Link Between Worlds on the 3DS. Hear me out. See, gems are plentiful, but if you're just playing through the game normally, like I was, you're going to end up with enough gems to basically buy one upgrade every time you finish a stage. And you can go buy an upgrade, and then you can go do a stage, and then you go buy an upgrade. And that pace between the two, mind you, I wasn't like going out of my way to get every single gem. So that's just normal playstyle, gets you at least some upgrades, which I like. That speaks to the level design. If you decide to grind, you will have enough for like 2 or 3 upgrades each time. Also, the gems in the basic town, in the hub world, respawn. All you have to do is go into the art gallery, leave, and get some. And so there was one time the whole playthrough where I was like, oh man, I need like 15 more gems. Hang on. There we go. Got the 15 gems. I say this reminds me of Link Between Worlds specifically because rupees in that game aren't mandatory except for a few. Like, you do need a few gems, or you need a few rupees, excuse me, in order to get a couple of items, but the rest are more convenience features or things that help to make it better but are not actually required to progress forward. In other words, in Link Between Worlds, it's to buy the items rather than rent them. And in the case of this game, it's to make it so your combat is better, basically. Like, almost every upgrade you get makes it so you take less damage, you do more damage, you do damage quicker, you use less magic, you get items to heal you, that kind of a stuff. Nothing that's actually required, just something that does help you out. And I do like that sweet spot that I do think this game hit. Granted, this is from the perspective of someone who is at least decent, tolerable, acceptable at Mega Man-style games. But I do like the sweet spot that, for me, it hit, that these upgrades were bonuses without being required. That is a very difficult sweet spot to hit in any video game for any reason. So, praise to that. Let's see. Do I have anything else about the gameplay? I don't actually think I do. I do love how virtually, not literally, but virtually every NPC and character in the game is dancing to some extent or another. We were actually talking about that live on stream, and there was a point at which we found the Naga vendor. And the Naga vendor's like, da-da-da-da, and then we walk away, and the Naga vendor starts dancing. And it's like, oh my god, look! Even the snake lady is dancing! Oh my god. Speaking of which, real quick thing. I loved the soundtrack of this game. I know that's a weird thing to comment on. I don't know musical terms or vocabulary, so I can't speak specifically to things, but it had wonderful tempo, beat, rhythm, all three of these things. I don't know. It was really good. It did actually feel like dun dun, music that you wanted to move to, or at least that I wanted to move to. And I will actually, or I have, excuse me. I've already done this. I have actually gone and purchased the soundtrack just because I loved it that much. So let's talk about the story, finally. I don't even know how long we're into this video. I don't have much to say about the story. First thing I want to say is that just having played this one game, and I kind of deliberately didn't look too much into the story of the previous games, I find myself reminded of One Piece, the anime and manga, in a good way, though. I'm reminded of the idea, because I've always loved the concept of One Piece. The ideas there have always fascinated me. It's a primarily aquatic setting, by which I mean, everyone lives on islands or on the line or whatever, and so naval concepts are very commonplace, and beaches and oceans and all that fun stuff. And then you're living on islands which have, relatively rare resources to deal with. And of course, there's some ancient technology or ancient power that used to be that we're still unearthing pieces from or ideas from. In the end of this game specifically, the uncle actually says, "I found this blueprints for something called a bicycle." It just adds to the kind of flavor there. And of course, the naval concepts, I get the impression, I should say, that pirates and monsters attacking is very normal. Not just Risky Boots, but pirates in general. And thus each town has its own guardian genie, or guardian half-genie, or what have you, which I also love the concept of. I've never been able to properly explain this and why it appeals to me so much. It appeals to me so much I put it into Primus, for example. I love the idea of a job position whose only job is protector of the city. you can only have that in certain settings. You have to morph the setting to fit the need for that kind of a job position. But having one guy or one girl or one thing whose only job is to specifically defend a town against whatever, against monsters, against pirates, against bandits, against, bugs, to be that kind of a position, a guardian, if you will. I love that concept. And so the idea of this series of islands who don't really have a lot of high technology, they don't really have a lot of powerful magic. From what I understand, mages are extremely rare. And even, the half genies themselves only have, very limited magic. So very low tier when it comes to magical power, and very low tier when it comes to technological power. So the way they defend themselves against these kind of everyday threats is they have a guardian. And I love that concept. I also, I very much enjoy the, I'm trying to think how to properly put this. I enjoy the idea, I enjoy the concept, if you will, of these people having a lot of different variety to the creatures, most of which are from fantasy, like the Naga I mentioned earlier, or a zombie. I guess 3 zombies, actually. There was a zombie, Roddy-Top, and her 2 brothers, Abner and Podameron? God, I actually can't, I'm not even sure I'm getting the right names. That doesn't sound right. I don't fully remember their names. They were only on screen for one bit each, one little quest each. But anyways, I love the idea that there's these multiple races that just kind of normally interact with. Oh yeah, Cyclops was another race that was there. And the little alligator guys. And the mermaids, It's just normal. There's just a cornucopia, if you will, of different species interacting in this mutually hostile environment. Next point, really quick. So, first of all, I noticed a bit of a trend early on. For being this lighthearted, silly, cute, happy game, the first real quest involves trying to prevent some guy from stealing maidens from a village, turning them into fake mermaids, and then selling them as food. Oh, also, apparently that food comes from mermaids in general. Ew. Next point is you go after a worm that literally eats memories. This game isn't exactly super dark. This isn't like at Dragon Quest levels, but some of this stuff made me just go, huh? What? What? But then the third guy is trying to make clothing out of magic carpets, which is just actually kind of awesome. And that was probably, I'd say, my second favorite boss fight, fighting against Ammo Baron, as he's flying around, using his own men as shields and ammo. I loved that. But I also love the idea in general of having that kind of just building your clothing out of magic carpet material so you can fly. It just actually makes a degree of sense to me. And then you have to go after Squid Baron, who wants... Well, actually, no, I guess you're going after Hypno Baron. Took me a moment there. In order to get... His evil scheme is to sell merchandise. Squid Baron was awesome, by the way. Even though it was the game in general didn't really have a fourth wall issue. Like it wasn't one of those games that just periodically breaks the fourth wall, like the recent Killer is Dead I went through. But for that one section, it was just like, oh, there's a fourth wall here. Hang on, smash, and then they just had fun with it. I love that. Why don't I go ahead and talk? I don't actually need my notes. I literally only have one note left on my page here. So why don't I just go ahead and talk about this? Let's talk about visual storytelling and some concepts. This is probably going to be me reading way too much into this, so forgive me if I am. And maybe some of this is answered by previous Shantae games. I don't know. I noticed very early on, because I have eyes, that Risky Boots literally looked different than everyone else in terms of just her visual style and, of course, her skin color and presentation. So I was like, Much later in the game, we find out that the dynamo machine that the uncle is building is designed to create electricity through usage of magnets and channeling it through a light and a dark crystal, which actually makes a surprising amount of sense when I just sit back and think about it. But then we find out that it, as a byproduct, as the waste byproduct that this generates, it also generates a lot of dark magic. Now, they don't say a lot about what dark magic is or how it functions, other than the fact that it corrupts. We do know that it is a corrupting energy source, and it is implied that the Genie realm itself is a realm of light magic, and therefore, obviously, the polar opposite. That would also mean that just about everything that Shantae herself does is based on light magic. Now, I bring this up because when Shantae gets corrupted by dark magic, she looks like Risky Boots. And that got me thinking, because Risky Boots' overall plot is to spread dark magic throughout the Genie realm in order to control them. Why would that give her control, though? I mean, you don't usually see a situation in which someone goes up and says, and so now I will make all of these people zombies, and then I'll have control over them. Unless you happen to have control over zombies in general. I actually have a weird theory here, because Risky Boots' motives were always kind of, to me. I have a theory that Risky Boots herself either is someone who has chosen to, because of her decisions in life, or because of her ambition, or because of her greed, or whatever, to regularly practice dark magic as a method, as how she accomplishes what she accomplishes, or as someone who maybe decided that once upon a time, in whatever backstory she has, and then became corrupted by dark magic herself, changing her into the appearance and style that she is now. Thus, it would make sense that she would want to corrupt other things to dark magic as well. Either A, she is completely deluded as a consequence of this, and therefore wants to spread the infection that she has, or B, she has gained sufficient control over dark magic that she feels that she could then control other things similarly corrupted. Again, the former leads more to the corruption idea, and the latter leans more towards the control idea. And I kind of like both ideas. The second one is one that appeals to me the most. I wonder if any of these questions will be answered in the Risky Boots DLC when it comes out. And it'll be funny to find out that I'm completely wrong and I'm reading way too much into what is effectively a lighthearted Mega Man game. But I also bring this up because there's a presentation throughout the game. I could try and talk about the politics of the setting, but there's actually not a lot to talk about there. It basically boils down to people who have access to certain resources, and as a result of having access to those resources, they have the ability to command others. If they lose access to those resources, they lose all their political sway and therefore are beholden unto others rather than controlling others. That's pretty much the basics of it. It's a very basic political system when you boil it down, even with the barons, although I'm curious why they're all called barons, but I digress. But there's a continuous presentation throughout the work of a really, really, really lighthearted version of Warhammer 40k. Hear me out. Because I get the strong impression, just based on a few scenes, especially the ones with the uncle, that none of these people know how any of this stuff really works. They know that it works. They know that it works in certain ways and how to control it, but they don't know how to replicate it. They don't know how to make it new. They don't know how to do anything with it. It's just, well, these things fly. Why? Because they fly. I don't know. Why does this thing go forward? Because it spins. I don't know. And I got that impression throughout the entirety of the work. Now, there are some things that contradict this. I mentioned the very low-tech thing earlier. There is actually a factory in this game with running conveyor belts and everything, so that kind of disagrees with the idea of a setting that doesn't even know what a bicycle is. So it is probable that I am reading too much into this. But I got the impression that this is effectively a post-apocalyptic, or excuse me, that's actually wrong, a post-apocalyptic scenario. A world that hasn't really had a chance to fully develop, but has nevertheless settled after something horrible happened. Picture FF6 about 500 years before FF6 actually started, that kind of a concept. And I admit that fascinated me. I actually was talking about this during the stream, and the concept brought up. And of course, everyone's going to have their own opinions and disagree and agree and whatever based on your personal perspective. But for me, I love the idea of a Mega Man-style precision platformer game that has a heavy story focus. I would love to play another Shantae game which really actually goes in depth into the setting, into the story, and tries to examine why this character acts this way and what's up with this character, and so forth and so on. Already, this Shantae had a fairly strong story focus, not super strong. It's not like a Final Fantasy level, but still far stronger than most you'd see, and I love that. I enjoy that. And I'm curious what you guys would think. But unfortunately, that is all I have to share. Great game. Can't wait to have a chance to play it again someday. And I hope to see you next time.